Hi everyone, this is Annindita Palaus and this video is about self-love. So if you have been following me for some time, then you probably already know that I'm a big proponent of self-love. I've already made a few videos talking about self-love. But this video is specifically about why certain spiritual teachers like Sadhguru talk against self-love, while most of the spiritual teachers have written and said so much about self-love. In fact, some time ago, I made this video called Why Sadhguru is Against Reiki. And I believe after watching that video, few people reached out to me asking, why do you think Sadhguru talks against self-love? If you have been following Sadhguru for some time, then I'm sure you might have come across his video where it seems like he's talking against self-love. And in that specific video, he talks about how love and respect is meant to be towards somebody else. It is between two people. And how an individual means a unit or someone who cannot be divided any further. And he talks about how, especially in the West, but these days, a lot of spiritual teachers talk about self-love, loving myself, believing in myself, trusting myself, so on and so forth. And how he thinks that it is an outrageous idea. Now, this is just my 2 cents based on my observation of Sadhguru's teachings and my understanding of his teachings. In my opinion, Sadhguru is a teacher who's always looking to break through your ideas of the limited self or the ego self, I, me, myself, the whole illusion that we create in duality. And in fact, he even points out that people respecting you is not about you, but it is about them. When you respect somebody else, it is not about that other person, but it is about who you are and how you are. In fact, the very person whom you respect might be someone who some other people don't respect at all. The very person whom you choose to love might be someone whom others choose to hate. So whether you love somebody or not, whether you hate somebody or not, whether you respect somebody or not, whether you honor somebody or not, it's really about you and not so much about that person. And the same applies to that person too. Whether someone chooses to love you or respect you or honor you or not, it is not so much about you, but it is about them, how they are within themselves. And another valid point that he makes is that when you start loving yourself or respecting yourself, you might start expecting others to treat you the same way as well, which may or may not happen. And your expectations might lead to disappointment. Which is true, and I see his point totally. And in fact, this reminds me of the scale of consciousness or the scale of emotions that I have many times spoken about in my videos, and I talk about them in my Reiki webinars as well as my meditation webinars, workshops, programs. I talk about the scale of consciousness very often, in fact. So without getting into the details about the scale of consciousness, what I just wanted to point out about the scale is that it is basically a scale of emotions or a scale of consciousness, however you want to look at it, where the lowest level of emotions or consciousness is that of guilt and shame. Then the next higher level is apathy. Then there is grief. Even though you might think that grief is such a negative energy, yet it is a little bit higher than apathy. It has a little bit more energy to it than apathy. Then eventually you go up to anger, which is still a very destructive energy, but it has more energy to it. It has more motion or more movement to it. And that is the reason why a lot of people choose to use the anger energy in order to motivate themselves into action, in order to accomplish whatever it is that they want to accomplish. But yet, it is a destructive energy, and it is good to remember that there are way more constructive energies to move on to beyond anger, which can also help in assisting us in achieving whatever goals that we are trying to achieve. But the reason I'm talking about the scale of consciousness or the scale of emotions here is because as you go up higher in the scale of consciousness, the emotions or the energy becomes lighter and lighter. People call it more positive, but negative and positive are sometimes looked upon as good and bad. But I want to go beyond just the shallow judgments of good and bad and talk more about in terms of the mechanics of it, that as you go up the scale of consciousness, the energies become less dense, they are lighter. and so you feel more liberated. And eventually, when you move up the scale to courageousness, acceptance, love, peace, you feel more and more and more liberated. You feel happier and happier. And yet, even when you are at the highest level in that scale, it is still important to note that all these feelings, all these emotions, they are still referring to this concept of I, to this whole illusion of I, me, myself. Because without that illusion of I, there is no one to experience the joy or the bliss or anger or apathy or grief. So there has to be this illusion of I, this imaginary I, or the ego that we have created that gets to experience these different scales of emotions or scales of consciousness. So when Sadhguru talks about an individual being a unit that cannot be further divided, he's actually referring to this fact that who you truly are is not that idea of I that you think you are. In fact, when babies are born, for the initial few years, they have not solidified that idea of I, me, myself as a separate individual. They would be looking at their hands with such intrigue, and they would be looking at the walls with the same amount of intrigue, with the same amount of interest. They would be looking at an insect with the same amount of interest that they would be looking at their own hands and toes and feet, because none of that is separate for them. It takes them some time to understand that this is me, whatever my name is. And in fact, initially, parents train them that if the kid's name is Annie or Joey or John or whatever, this is John, this is mommy, this is daddy, this is uncle, this is John's toy. And that is how they start understanding that there is a separation between me and everything else that I see around myself. So once we really buy into that idea of separation completely, and again, I want to point out that in order to live in this life, we do need to have that ego. That ego enables us to take action in this life and to do what we came here to do. So it does serve a purpose. But when you know how to use the ego to achieve your purpose, and then you know how to put it down or put it aside, then you are not controlled by the ego anymore. Then the ego is under your control and you are using it to achieve the purpose that you came here to achieve. However, sometimes when people get into the idea of self-love, they might falsely start associating themselves with that ego self as being me, and they start associating the idea of self-love to the ego-based identities, like only associating that love with their physical appearances, with their looks, with how their body appears, with how their home appears, how the car appears, what kind of job they do. And they get so obsessed sometimes that they might be constantly thinking of ways to improve how their appearance looks like to the world. And in the name of self-love, they might be spending a lot of money and a lot of time and energy trying to improve just the physical appearance, or trying to improve just their possessions, trying to show a certain image to the outside world. Like I have seen so many people spending thousands and thousands of dollars trying to improve a small little feature in their face or a small little part of their body. They have associated themselves so much with their body that now, in the name of self-love and taking care of yourself, they're spending a lot of time and energy on improving something external. So I'm not saying that self-love does not include pampering yourself or taking care of yourself, or personal hygiene and grooming is not a part of self-love. Of course, it is a part of self-love. But as long as you are conscious enough to love the part of yourself that is really you, the essence of who you are, and not just associate self-love with the external representations of you, but who you truly are, the essence of you, then self-love would not feed into that duality mindset that we already have. Because that which you are is pure awareness. It is that field of awareness in or on which everything arises. The whole drama of life arises on that field of awareness. And so far, my understanding of Sadhguru's teachings is this, that he is a teacher who is very interested in breaking people free from the idea or the illusion of separation. And that is why through his words and actions, he would often nudge people or poke people or prod people into that realization of who they truly are. Not as the body, as the mind, as the emotion, but the essence of who they truly are as pure awareness. Because awareness is all encompassing. Awareness is all inclusive in nature. Awareness does not exclude anything. And because it is all inclusive in nature, the question of self-love does not come. There is just love. There is just love that is for everything, for one and all. There is no separation between self and non-self. So here is my 2 cents about self-love. I believe that the nature of life is evolution. Even though evolution in and of itself is a concept that is based in duality, because awareness does not need to evolve beyond what it already is. Awareness is infinite. It is already infinite. It is already unlimited. It is already unbound by anything. It is already timeless. In fact, if you can, take a moment now and just close your eyes and see if you can get in touch with that awareness that you are. Just that field of awareness or that empty space in or on which the whole drama of life unfolds. Or the silence that allows all sounds to be. And even if you can just get a slight glimpse of it, maybe 0.0001%, you will see that this awareness that you are is beyond any definitions, is beyond any mental ideas of evolution. This awareness is just this field of pure potentiality. And this is a field in or on which the whole drama of life unfolds. Everything arises in and out of this field. And so this awareness is inclusive in nature. It is not excluding anything. And see if you can get a feel for any boundaries, if this awareness has any boundary. If you can see a beginning or an end to this awareness, and you will see that this awareness has no beginning, no end, and it has no boundaries. There are no ups and downs, no lefts and rights. It just is. So awareness is beyond any mental concept of evolution. When it comes to self-love from a non-dualistic perspective, then self-love is not needed because love is all that there is. There is no separate self. There is no separate I, me, and myself. But when it comes to evolution from a dualistic perspective, then self-love is needed. And I believe that in that case, self-love, in fact, can be the key which can greatly accelerate one's evolution. Even though evolution is an illusion, which only exists in duality, because in unity consciousness, there is no better or worse. For evolution to exist, first of all, there has to be the illusion of time, because over a period of time, there is evolution. And also the idea that something is better than something else. Or the idea of progress, the illusion of progress, moving forward in time. All that requires our dualistic nature. But while we are operating in that duality, and honestly speaking, most of humanity is operating at a level of duality. So while we are operating at the level of duality, self-love, I believe, is the key that can greatly accelerate one's process of evolution, one's consciousness, and eventually take us beyond duality to that non-dualistic perspective of being the awareness. So it's just my personal experience that duality has this built-in mechanism which we call evolution, which allows us to move beyond duality. So the process of evolution is something that exists in duality because it is a dualistic mindset. And that process in and of itself is designed in a manner that it allows us eventually to go beyond duality. So duality is built in with this mechanism which we call evolution. And that mechanism of evolution, I feel, can be greatly accelerated with the practice of self-love. The only thing to keep in mind is this, that not to associate self-love or the idea of the self that we refer to when we talk about self-love, or when most of the spiritual teachers talk about self-love. That idea of the self is not just limited to yourself as the body, or yourself as your emotions and your thoughts, but it goes way beyond that. As long as you don't associate your idea of self-love to only the body and focus all your time and energy on improving your looks, although there is no harm in improving your looks, there is no harm in losing extra weight or in getting healthy, in looking better, feeling better, there is no harm in any of that. If self-love only refers to love for the ego self, then that only leads to an inflated ego. And I believe that that could have been one of the reasons why Sadhguru has been against self-love, or has never been propagating self-love or promoting self-love, because often people misunderstand it, and often it only leads to an ego inflation. But as long as you are mindful that self-love is not just about the physical appearances of the self, it's not just about portraying a certain image of yourself out in the world, it's not just about spending a lot of money on buying expensive clothing, jewelry, cosmetics, and making yourself pretty, making your house pretty, and just for the purpose of projecting a certain image to the world. As long as self-love is not just limited to that, then there is no risk of ego inflation, because the ego can really hinder your progress on the spiritual journey. An inflated ego, not just the ego, because we need the ego in our daily life for many functions, and in fact, we also need the ego in our spiritual path as well, because the ego does serve a purpose. And that is just my 2 cents. So I hope you like this video. If you like it, then like it, leave your comment below, and share it with your friends and family. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, then do it right now. I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.